The woman stood at the door of her home and knew she would not sleep there again. Her husband had been dead 3 days. The funeral pyre still smoldered beyond the settlement walls. She could smell it when the wind changed. Wood ash and something sweeter, more terrible. The other women had already stopped looking at her. That was the first sign. When your neighbors avert their eyes, you are no longer protected by custom. You are no longer anything at all. A man appeared at the edge of her property. Not her husband's brother. Not anyone from her family. He wore her husband's sword belt. She recognized the bronze clasp she had polished the morning her husband left for the raid. The man did not speak. He simply waited, as if she already understood the transaction that had taken place without her knowledge or consent. She did. This is not a story about Vikings as conquerors. It is a story about what conquest meant for the women who became its currency. When a raiding party returned successful, the dead were honored. Songs were composed. Pyres were built. Wealth was distributed. But there was another distribution that took place in the days following a warrior's death. One that happened quietly, in doorways and at tables where women were not invited to sit. The Scandinavian world of the 8th and 9th centuries operated on inheritance laws that were surprisingly progressive for their time. Women could own property, they could divorce, they held keys to the household stores and commanded respect within the domestic sphere. But these rights existed only as long as they remained attached to a man who could defend them, a father, a husband, a grown son. When that man died, the protections died with him. A widow with young children and no adult male relative nearby was not a person. She was a problem to be solved, and the most efficient solution was redistribution. The woman had been married 12 years. She had borne 4 children. 2 had survived infancy. Her husband had been a successful trader and occasional raider, respected in the community, wealthy enough to own 3 slaves and a ship share. She had expected to grow old in the house he built. She had expected her sons to inherit. On the 4th day after his death, the elders of the settlement came to her door. They did not ask her to sit. They did not offer condolences. One man, older, with silver in his beard and rings on every finger, told her the decision that had been made. Her husband's brother, who lived 2 days' travel south, had declined to take responsibility for the household. He had his own family, his own concerns. The dead man's ship share would be sold. The slaves would be divided. The house and land would pass to another family. And she would go with it, not as a wife, not with ceremony or negotiation or bride price. She would simply belong to the household now, a dependent with no claim to anything she had built or tended or preserved. Her children would remain. They were valuable. A boy of 7 could work. A girl of 9 could be married in a few years. But the woman herself was no longer young, no longer fertile, no longer attached to a man of status. She had become what they called in the old sagas a leftover woman. The man with the silver beard did not wait for her response. There was nothing to respond to. He told her to gather what she could carry. Someone would come for her in the morning. Then he left. History records the great raids. It records the settlements, the trade routes, the battles and treaties, and the slow transformation of paganism into Christianity. It records the names of kings and jarls and famous shield maidens who fought beside men. It does not record what happened to the women who simply lived, who bore children and kept households and survived their husbands, only to discover that survival was not the same as continuity. There were laws. The Gragas, the medieval Icelandic legal code compiled centuries later, contains provisions for widows. A woman could inherit a portion of her husband's estate if there were no sons. She could claim her dowry and mourning gift. She could return to her father's household if he still lived. But laws are only as strong as the men willing to enforce them. And in a society where power was measured in the ability to hold land, command loyalty, and wield a sword, a woman alone had no power at all. She could appeal to the thing, the local assembly where disputes were settled. But the thing was composed of men. men who might benefit from her removal, men who had already decided what would happen to her property and her children and her body. The law said she had rights. The men said she had none. And in the end, the men were the law. The woman did not resist. Resistance was not an option. Where would she go? Back to her father's household, if he still lived. He had married her off 12 years ago to secure an alliance. She was no longer his concern. To another settlement, where she knew no one and had no claim to hospitality. A woman traveling alone was prey. To the forest, to live as an outlaw? She would starve before the first snow, so she gathered what she could carry: a cloak, a knife, a spindle, a small wooden box that had belonged to her mother. Her daughter watched from the doorway. The girl understood more than she should have. Children always do. She did not cry. She had already learned that crying changed nothing. The woman knelt and touched her daughter's face. She did not promise to return. She did not lie. She simply looked at the child for a long moment, memorizing her features, and then stood and walked away. The man with her husband's sword belt was waiting. What happened to these women? Some were absorbed into new households as servants or lesser wives. Their status eroded, but their survival guaranteed. Some were married off quickly to younger sons or widowers who needed laborers more than companions. Some disappeared entirely from the record, mentioned once in a property transfer and never again. And some resisted. The sagas contain scattered references to women who refused reassignment. Women who barricaded themselves in their homes. Women who took their own lives rather than submit to redistribution. These stories are brief, almost footnotes. The saga writers did not dwell on them. They were not heroic. They were not instructive. They were simply uncomfortable. One saga mentions a woman named Hallgerd, who after her husband's death was claimed by his cousin. She refused. The cousin came with several men. They broke down her door. She was dragged from her home. The saga does not record what happened next. It moves on to the next battle, the next dispute, the next important thing. Hallgerd vanishes. History does not say she died. It simply stops mentioning her, as if she had never existed at all. The woman walked behind the man with the sword belt. He did not speak to her. He did not look back to see if she followed. He knew she would. There was nowhere else to go. They reached his household by evening. It was smaller than the one she had left, darker, dirtier. His actual wife, young, hard-faced, already exhausted, stood in the doorway and assessed the woman the way you assess livestock. Useful or not useful, burden or asset. She was given a place to sleep near the fire. Not the best place, not the warmest, but a place. She was given work. Endless work. Grinding grain, hauling water, mending clothes, tending animals. The labor of survival without the dignity of ownership. She worked until her hands cracked and bled. She worked until she could not remember what it felt like to rest. She was not beaten. She was not starved. She was simply erased. The other women in the household did not speak to her unless necessary. She was a reminder of what could happen to any of them. A cautionary figure. A ghost walking among the living. At night, she lay by the fire and thought about her children. She wondered if her daughter still remembered her face. She wondered if her son would grow up believing she had abandoned them. She wondered if they were told the truth, or if the truth had already been reshaped into something more convenient. She did not pray. The gods had not protected her husband. They would not protect her. She simply endured. This is the part history does not teach. The raids, the settlements, the expansion of Viking influence across Europe, all of it was built on a foundation of women like her. Women who lost everything when their protectors died. Women who were reassigned and redistributed and erased. Women whose labor sustained households, whose bodies produced the next generation, whose silence allowed the system to function without resistance. They were not chattel, not exactly. The law gave them nominal rights, The culture acknowledged their value. But value is not the same as agency. Acknowledgement is not the same as protection. And when the choice is between submission and starvation, dignity becomes a luxury no one can afford. The woman lived in that household for 6 years. She grew old faster than she should have. Her hair went gray, her back bent. Her hands became gnarled claws, useful only for the roughest work. She never saw her children again. One winter she grew ill, a fever, nothing dramatic. She lay by the fire and shivered and did not complain. No one called for a healer. No one wasted resources on a woman whose value had been spent. She died on a Tuesday. They wrapped her in old cloth and buried her in unconsecrated ground beyond the settlement boundary where the forgotten went. No stone marked the place. No one spoke her name at the grave. The household went on without her. Another woman was found to do the work. Life continued. Her husband's name appears in surviving records. He is mentioned in a land transfer document. His ship share is recorded in a trade agreement. Historians can trace his lineage, his property, his movements. Her name appears nowhere. Not in sagas, not in legal documents, not in genealogies. She existed only as a dependent, a possession, a problem that was solved and then forgotten. This was not unusual. Most women left no record. They lived and worked and died without anyone bothering to preserve their existence. The Viking Age is celebrated for its adventurers and explorers and warriors. But it was also this: a woman standing at the door of her home, knowing she would never sleep there again, and no one thinking her loss was worth remembering. History did not forget her. It chose not to remember.